Hi there. Today we're going to look at Border Corner in Creative Studio 7.0. Now Border Corner is one of those functions that sometimes people just don't quite understand, so I'm going to take you through the basics of how to do it and then of course how to complete a full border corner, okay? So we're going to do the top border, the bottom border, and we're actually going to turn the quilt to complete the sides with a fun function that I call apply. So without further ado, let's go back to the basics. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with picking our pattern for our border corner. Okay, so I'm going to do this blue border and we're going to do the top piece first. We're going to actually roll all the way to the bottom, do the bottom piece, and then we're going to turn the quilt to do the sides. Now, if I was actually doing this border corner method on an actual quilt, okay, I would quilt the top border, I would do the edge to edge or custom work, whatever I decided to do in the middle, and work down that until I get to the bottom, do the bottom border, and then turn the quilt. But for the season, we had to do these inside custom pieces first before we finished off with border corner, okay? So we're gonna work with this top piece first, and then we'll roll to the bottom. So we're gonna go ahead and choose our pattern in Creative Studio. So I'm gonna come over to my pattern manager, and I'm looking for Swirl Pearl, and this one's by Joyce Lundrigan. And I have my corner piece here and my border piece. So I'm going to select both of those at the same time and add them to my project. We've talked a lot throughout the season that it's very important that you're adding the patterns to your project before you use them so you're not working out of your database. And today you're actually going to figure out why, okay? So I'm going to select my corner. I'm going to hold Control and I'll select my border piece by left clicking on it. I'll then right click on the two after I've let go of Control and go to Add to Project. I'll open up my Project tab, and there they are, and I don't need this one, so let's remove him out. There we go, okay? So we have these two, and we need to select both of them to start the border corner function, okay? So we're gonna left click on the corner, hold Control, and select the border piece, and then we're gonna select the border corner icon. So I'll left click on border corner, and I'm going to take the head of the machine, and you'll see that Creative Studio is giving me some instructions, kind of like it did in Edge to Edge in the first episode of the season, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to take the head of the machine to the upper left outer corner, okay? And I'm going to do that 1/4 inch in. So I will click my point there, I'll click OK. I'll take the machine to the upper right outer corner, and click OK. I'm coming to the lower right outer corner, and the lower right is just what you can get to at this one time. It's just what's in your quilting area, okay? Please do not roll the quilt all the way to the bottom and select that lower right point, okay? Stay right here in your throat space area and do the lower right of that throat space, okay? So I'm going to select OK there. I'm going to go to the lower left outer corner and click OK here. And now after I've clicked these 4 points, you'll see that Creative Studio has brought up another set of instructions. It's telling us to click the upper left inner corner. So I'm going to take the head of my machine to my upper left inner corner, and I'm doing this one right on the seam line, okay? And I'm going to click OK. I'm going to go to the upper right outer corner and click OK. I'm going to the lower right inner corner. So right here. And this is, like I said earlier, same for the outer as for the inner. We're making sure that we're doing it just for our throat space, okay? So lower right inner, and I'm going to click OK, and then lower left inner right here, and I'm going to click OK. Now, as you'll see, it's populated our patterns on the screen for us, okay? But it's also asking us for our border length. So I'm going to enter in the length of my border, and this one is 48 inches. And I'll click Enter, okay? And you'll see here that it has added the extra repeat that it can to fill the space, okay? And over here on the right-hand side is our border corner setup box, okay? So we have the option to change our margin if we would like to. You can change the corner types or the orientations of the patterns. And that's just if the corner type is a different set. So this one is set up to be in the upper left corner. That's how the pattern's designed. But if this pattern was designed to be in the upper right corner, then I would change the orientation to upper right. You'll seldomly run across some patterns that you have to change the orientation. Not very common these days. Most designers are designing them in the upper left corner, which is what Creative Studio defaults to. Okay, so I'm actually going to go ahead and click OK. Now, if we see here on the quilt, I'm not super worried about the outer corners and sides as much as I am these inner ones, okay? I like to make sure that I can easily walk away from the machine and let the machine do what it needs to do and me not have to worry about it, okay? So the sides I'm not too worried about. It's these inner seams that I don't want this pattern to stitch into, okay? And when we clicked our upper left inner and our upper right inner, lower right inner, and lower left inner, basically what Creative Studio is doing is making a straight line in between these 2 points. This point, and this point, okay? And many of us know that I am not the piecing king, but neither are most of our customers. Are not the piecing queens or piecing kings either, okay? So what I actually want to do is delete this inner boundary and come in and re-click another boundary that's more accurate so I can make sure that none of my quilting is going to quilt over into these blocks and out of the border because of a wonky seam, okay? So to do that, the inner boundary is already selected, okay, and I'm just going to press the delete key on my keyboard, and it's gone. And I'm going to come up to draw boundary, left click on draw boundary, and take the head of my machine and start wherever I'd like. I just start down here. And I'm going to click multiple points up the seam line of this border. Make my way across here. And they don't have to be super close together unless the piecing is really bad, okay? But I'm just following these, making clicks as I go, staying on that seam line. And once I get down here to my lower right corner, I'm just going to hit close drawing and exit drawing, okay? So what we can see here on the screen is now we have a much more accurate representation of what's going on the quilt as opposed to just straight lines, okay? And looking here, I'm actually still fairly comfortable with what's going on. Nothing is stitching into the seams, and I'm fine with that. What I could do, however, is maybe bring these in a little bit closer to have some room for the binding on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side, okay? Bring them a little closer to the seam. One thing to note is that when you're using the border corner function, Creative Studio, the reason you enter in the length is Creative Studio calculates the size it needs for these repeats so it can make sure that these are going to connect properly throughout the quilt or when you turn the quilt like we're going to do today. So if you ever play with your handles for a pattern, just know to never pull the patterns down, okay? So never touch the down arrow and pull them down because you will take all of Creative Studio's calculations and basically throw them out the window, okay? And so Creative Studio is here to help you. So just make sure that you leave these bottom arrows alone. Now I can change the sides all day long if I want to, okay? But I want to leave my bottom arrow alone. So once I have this set the way that I like, I'm going to go ahead and hit Start Quilting, and the machine will move to its starting point. It's going to take a single stitch, allowing me to pull up the bobbin thread. I will press Continue on my keypad, and it's going to start tying off and begin quilting that border corner for me. Okay, and it's coming up to its ending stitch right here, so it's going to tie off, and then I will cut my bobbin thread, just like that, and I'll click Continue. Okay, So we have our top border done, and like I said, if I was actually doing this on a quilt where I haven't done the center pieces already, I would have done my border corner, then I would have stitched what's going on here, continued stitching the center pieces all the way down, and then did the bottom. But like I said, for the season, we had to go ahead and complete these first before we did that border corner, okay? So we've done the top border corner. I'm actually gonna roll the quilt to the bottom. We're gonna do the bottom border corner, so let me go ahead and roll that, and I'll be right back. Alrighty, so we have rolled up the quilt and we're here at the bottom now. So what I need to do first is create a boundary around my bottom border right here, okay? So what I'm going to do is come to my computer screen, and I'm going to select all of my patterns, okay, just by left clicking and holding at the bottom right and dragging it to the top left. And they have been selected, so I'm just going to drag them out of the way, okay? And then I need to delete these boundaries because they are now irrelevant, seeing as they were the boundaries for the beginning section, okay, at the very top. So I've selected one, I'm just going to press delete. I'll left click in the center of the next one and press delete, and they're both gone. And then I'm going to redraw my boundary around the bottom. So I'll left click on draw boundary, and I'm going to take the head of the machine, and starting here at the top, I'm just going to, using my select button, click down the seam, and across, and then up, okay. Whenever I get to the top again, I'm just going to come all the way over to the right and follow it down, staying within that 1/4 inch margin. And across, and up. Whenever I get here, remember that draw boundary is a 2-step process, so we'll hit close drawing and exit drawing. So I'm going to come back to my computer screen, select all of these patterns. I'm going to drag them over here, and remember, it's very imperative in border corner when you're doing this that anytime you're playing with your top border again and you're trying to put it on the bottom, please make sure that you're rotating the patterns and not flipping them, okay? Because if you flip the pattern, it's going to take them out of their directionality, and then it's going to screw up your sides whenever you go and put those in, okay? So you can right click and rotate by a number of degrees right here. Or if you like keyboard shortcuts like myself, the keyboard shortcut for rotate is the space bar. So I'm just going to rotate that twice and drop that down right into my border, just like so, okay? So it's going to fit in, and I can look at my boundary and see if everything's going to fit properly, and if there's any adjustments that I need to make, I can do that. So I'm looking right here and I'm seeing that this is a little off how it was centered up. So I'm going to left click and hold and select all of these and just barely change the angle with my plus or minus sign. So I'm going to use the minus button and kind of rotate it a little bit more around just so it gets to be more straight with that seam line. Because, you know, we all know I'm not the piecing king, so my top boundaries probably weren't as straight as they could have been for my borders, but that's okay. That's what Creative Studio is here to do. It's here to help us out. So now putting this one in, that looks a lot better. I've got even distance here between. It's got a nice margin here, okay? Now, since this pattern was used at the top, it is technically still a sewable pattern. It's still sewn, I'm sorry. So I need to toggle it as unsewn, so Creative Studio will tell the machine to go ahead and stitch that. So I'm going to select it all. I will right click and come down to toggle group unsewn, okay? And this is going to have these patterns stitching from right to left, okay, they're going to stitch around. And if you have a machine that doesn't like stitching from right to left, because some of us do, you can reorder these patterns so they'll stitch from left to right. So if you left click on this first one right here, you can come to the option of order join, left click on order join, and it's going to reorder them to stitch from left to right, okay? And that's what I'm going to go ahead and do. So I've got this here, I've got a nice accurate boundary, so I know these are going to stitch out okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit start quilting. The machine is going to move to its start point. I will take the top thread, pull up my bobbin thread, and while holding it taut, press continue on the keypad. and trim those, and it's off. Okay, we're coming up here to the end. It's going to do its tie-off stitches. Ding. I'll move the machine out of the way, pull it back to where it ended, take a single stitch, pull up those bobbin threads, and trim those away. Okay, and just like that, I have finished my top and my bottom border. Now, I did tell you we were actually going to turn the quilt today to complete the rest of the border. And the reason I say we're going to turn the quilt is, one, it allows you, especially when you're doing a really big quilt, to get that all done in one pass, as opposed to you having to basically chunk them in the sides and hoping that your measurements are all going to line up, okay? But doing it across, we're going to use a function called apply in Creative Studio 7 that's going to put those right in there just like that, and it's going to be really, really simple for you to do. It's completely worth the extra few minutes just to unpin and turn the quilt and repin it again. So give me just a few minutes. I'm actually going to do that, and I will be right back. Alrighty, so I have got the quilt turned here, okay, and I have it mounted on its side, and we've got the top border to do, and we've got our bottom border to do as well, okay? So the first thing that I want to do is I want to draw a boundary around what piece of the border that I need to finish, okay? If that being the whole length, or the whole width, I'm sorry, of the border, or if I've only got to do this one little section depending on the size of the quilt, okay? So I'm actually going to open up another quilt group. So right up here at the top we have this little plus on a little tab, and I can add another quilt group, and that basically gives me a fresh, clean working space to work on, okay? I can still get back to our previous pieces, but I can use this fresh, clean working space to do what I need to do. So I'm going to come to draw boundary, and I can mode over to that, and I will select that piece, and I'm going to come over to this piece, and I'm going to go about an inch or two past where I actually need to start quilting. So I'm going to click multiple points inside the ditch. Okay, right there. I'll go all the way up, and keeping that 1/4 inch spacing, I'm going to come all the way back, just like so, okay? And when I get there, I'm going to hit close drawing, and I'm going to click exit drawing, okay? And what I need to do is I need to make sure that this sized repeat, okay, matches everything else down the piece. So the ones that are going to go in here are the same size as what we have, okay? And this is where I said throughout the season I've been hounding you about making sure that you're adding the patterns to your project before you do anything else. And this is exactly why right here in this piece, okay? So I'm going to come back to my previous quilt group, and here is the bottom part of our border, which is now on the far right of the quilt, okay, since we've turned the quilt. And I want to left click on one of these side repeats. Okay, so here's one right here, and take note of these measurements right here at the bottom of the screen. We have the width and the height, okay? Now remember, when these measurements were intact, it was because the quilt was going straight up and down. We were doing the top border and the bottom border. But now that we have flipped the quilt, we need to flip these numbers in order for them to work down the sides of the quilt. Now that is at the top, okay? So I'm going to left click on this piece right here, this border piece in my pattern manager, and I will then right click on it and come to view properties. Once the properties window opens up, you can still see that the pattern that we selected is still highlighted and the measurements are still here at the bottom. But I want to go ahead and turn my aspect ratio off by left clicking on it. And with these numbers, remember, since we've turned the quilt, we have to flip those numbers. So this width number of 5.31 actually needs to be the height, okay? So in the height section, I'm going to type in 5.31, okay, for my example. And in the width section, I'm going to type what this height number was, which was 6.02, okay? And I'll hit enter. And then those numbers are there. Okay, remember they're going to be opposite of what's here because we have rotated the quilt. And I'm going to hit save and close. Okay, and I'm going to come back to my other quilt group, and I'm going to use draw line. So I'm left click on draw line, and I'm going to take the head of my machine to where I want to start quilting. I want to start right here because I'm going to end up right here. So I'm going to get right on that start point, and I'm going to click select, and I'm going to go to where I want it to stop quilting, which is right here, and press select. With any of the drawing functions in Creative Studios we've talked about over the season, they're a two-step process. So we want to close the drawing and exit the drawing. Okay? So I have that line on the screen, and I'll move the machine head out of the way so you can see it. There we go. So I have the line on the screen, so I need to get from here to here with this pattern at the correct sizes. Okay, so we've entered in those sizes, because remember we pulled them from that previous border corner group. I have the line selected, and I'm going to come to apply pattern. And right there it has applied 2 repeats to fit into that spot. And we know they're going to go from the right point to the right point because we drew a line from point to point, and they have applied to connect here to here. Okay? Now the only thing that we need to delete before we do anything else, okay, is we need to make sure we delete this line because it's still technically a sewable line. Okay? So it stays highlighted, the path pattern will stay highlighted, and we're just going to hit delete on the keyboard. Okay? And there's our repeats for the sides. You can imagine if you're working on a quilt that's 108 inches wide now that we've turned it, it's a lot easier to do that one thing all the way across, and then that gives you the ability to make your boundary all the way down, and you can shift those patterns accordingly to make sure they're going to fit just the way that you need them to. Okay? So I just take my machine head, I'm doing a few extra checks right here, just making sure everything's going to line up. I know I did the boundary, I just want to make sure everything's still lining up properly. My start point's there, which is good, and my end point's going to be right here because we did point to point with that draw line. So all I have to do now is come to start quilting. The machine is going to move to where it needs to start, which is dead on where I click that point. Okay, I'm going to hold these threads taut, press continue, and it's going to begin stitching. We're coming around right here to our ending point, and because we did that point-to-point line, they're going to match up absolutely perfectly. So I'll trim that thread piece up here because I forgot to trim that. I'll pull the machine towards me, go back, single stitch, pull those bobbin threads up, and cut that. And just like that, I have got a perfect border corner by taking those few extra minutes just to turn the quilt. Okay, so that was the top piece. So now we need to do the bottom. So give me just a few seconds. I'm going to roll up the quilt, and we're going to repeat this process again, okay? Alrighty, so we have rolled up the quilt, and we're here at the bottom. Okay, so we're going to go through this process again of making sure we're drawing a boundary and different things like that. So I am just going to delete what I've got on the screen here because it's no longer needed. I'm going to come to draw boundary, and I'm going to go ahead and draw a boundary around what I need to work with. This one with the seam, making sure I'm staying right in that seam line. Coming straight down, keeping that 1/4 inch on the way back. Close drawing, exit drawing. Okay. Now, for our sizes for our border piece, Creative Studio is going to remember that in the properties. So you remember we did view properties, and there's those same sizes. And when we're changing sizes in a pattern, this is why I've been hounding you throughout the season to add patterns to your project first. Okay. So when we change these sizes in our project tab, it's only changing it for this pattern in this project, okay? So if I was to use this same pattern again in another project, it's going to default back to the designer's design size because that was my database. They're in my database, and I'm pulling them from my database to put them in my project. And when they're in my project, they're just gonna stay there. And when I change those sizes, they're only affecting the pattern in the project, that copy that's in the project, and not what's working in my database. Okay. And that's just because if I ever change these numbers to some really odd number that skews this pattern, but I need it for a particular quilt, if I try to use it again on the next quilt, and I'd be working out of my database if I did this, then it would screw up what I'd be working with because it would have changed those designed numbers. So always add the pattern to your project before you start using it, and don't work out of your database, okay? So draw a line, okay? We're back at our draw line, so I'm gonna left click on draw line. And this pattern not so much is a problem, okay? But with most border corner patterns, they are directional patterns, okay? So remember at the top of the quilt, we went from where we wanted it to start quilting to where we wanted it to end, okay? Which was from left to right, and that put the patterns right side up, okay? Well, when you turn the quilt and you roll it back down to the bottom here, and we're at the bottom piece of the turned quilt now, we have to go from right to left, so it will put those patterns upside down. So when it's going around the entire quilt, it looks like a nice continuous border corner, okay? So I'm clicking my draw line at the bottom of the quilt from right to left. Close drawing, exit drawing. Okay, and I'm going to select that line, come to apply pattern, and there it is, and make sure we remember to delete that path line because since we use draw line, it is still technically a sewable line. So we want to delete that out, and here is this, and I can just run a few checks with the head of my machine if I'd like to make sure that everything is where I need it to be. And we're good there, and we're good there, and everything's lining up exactly where I need it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Start Quilting. And it's going to start over here on the right and move to the left. Now, if you're not comfortable with your machine stitching from right to left, you can reorder it like we did in the previous part of this video, okay? But I'm perfectly fine with my machine doing that, so I'm going to go ahead and hold these threads taut and click Continue and let it go. All right, so it's coming on up, and since we did that draw line, they're going to end up exactly where they're right there. Perfect. Pull up my threads to trim my bobbin thread, cut that, and press continue. I'll trim those as well. And just like that, I have completed a real nice and simple border corner by doing the top border, the bottom, and then turning the quilt and using apply to apply it across the rest of the quilt. Thank you so much for joining me today and learning a little bit more about Border Corner in Creative Studio 7.0. Isn't it super easy just being able to do the top border, the bottom, turn the quilt really quick, and use draw line and apply to place those repeats in just like that and only have 2 start and end points. You're not having to worry about sizing. You can check if you have a wonky border, and it gives you the ability just to be 100% sure that your borders are going to look the way you want them to. Well, that does it for Season 2. I'll see you next time when we go back to the basics.